Okay.
Well,
and you can see the screen right now if you're on aluticeducation.org.
Yes, you have a couple boxes. There's one box that's over.
Yeah, that's your pictures. Let me make
Oh,
this smaller. If I go like that, is it better? All right. Well, I made this site when, and I don't remember the year. I don't know if it says it. Um, it must have been around 2012, 2013, when I was working on my dissertation, which I finished in 2012. And it was before I was the executive director at the Alutiiq Museum. So I was kind of in between jobs, and the dissertation is available on Alaska Native Knowledge Network. So it's live and out there for anybody to read it for free, but it's one whole book, it's almost 200 pages. Not everybody's going to find that approachable. So I thought if I took the same content and broke it into pieces on a web page, that maybe it would be more useful. And this website came to be through conversation with Terry Schneider and I about all of the resources that the school district had in a kind of a hidden network that teachers had access to in the district. So we're talking like a couple hundred people, but that most of them didn't use a lot, and they were Alutiiq education focused, and people were going to upgrade that system or change it. And Terry was concerned that all of the content may be lost. And where would it be housed, and what was the next solution? There didn't seem to be within the district a big motivation at the moment, to address that issue with anything. So we came up with an external facing website that would have a database and all of the content that she and I would just upload it to this website. And so before we added the different tabs that I'll share with you, we created, the whole backbone of this site is this resources tab. And so when you click on the word resources at the top, and this is one thing I'm not as happy about, some of the tabs, when you look at the top, there is a page that's embedded as the tab, and then the sub-tabs are separate pages. But people might think, they might not click on that core tab, they might think it's only the subs. So there's some navigation things that aren't as smooth as they could be, I think, in hindsight. But at the resource database, if you click on either the resources or resource database, it takes you to this catalog. And this is the content that I was mentioning that the school district had. And so if you scroll down, you can see there are about a little over 200 items that are housed here, and they are organized. I had the template for, they had to have a specific ID number for every item that got added, and it's just numerical. The title of the piece, who the author was, the year it was created, what grade levels it was appropriate for, and if there were subject areas. We also added a values tab. And so my dissertation is based off of the 14 core values that the Alutiiq elders from around Kodiak Island, was the Academy of Elders. Terry worked with them for a couple of years prior to this, like in the early 2000s, on identifying what our core values were. And so we used that. During my dissertation process, I interviewed our elders at Language Club. It took, I don't know, maybe a couple months to work through those different value statements that were in English and translate them into Alutiiq again. And so that is represented with the values tab. So you can actually sort and look for anything that is tagged as reference to serving that particular value area. You can also sort by who the sponsor was. Some of them were, or no, a specific, like a specific organization. We got it from the Alaska Native Knowledge Network through UAF or something like that. And then, of course, the subject matters. There could be, and other may be many different things, but these were the subjects that we identified from the types of materials we had. And you can keyword search. But if you click into one of them, let's see, we'll look at incorporating Alutiiq culture into the classroom, an educational tool for teachers. So when you click into it, you can see that core information at the top, but then the subjects, and many of them are multidisciplinary, and same with values. They might span all the values, like this piece, because it was a bigger PDF. The website of its source is listed, because many of these sites, these pieces, these documents, some of them are available on other websites, but this was supposed to be like a clearinghouse for the documents, so that in case those source websites decided or links broke, organizations changed and folded, that they would be housed here. And if you click on, so I'll right click so that it opens a new tab, the PDF, it's loading in the background. You'll be able to see what the pop-up would be. And then of course, sponsors, if we had any notes. So on the other tab, this is the document that popped up. So it was a PowerPoint that Claire Fulp made for the Alutiiq Museum, and she presented it to teachers, teaching them about how to work with the museum's educational boxes and who the different players were and what resources were available for teachers. So it was a really nice orientation piece that we didn't want to have lost. And let's go here. Spring Plants is another really important resource that I don't think gets used a lot. We made this, the Native educators of the Alutiiq region produced a lot of these resources, and in there we made a book. So we have this book called Spring Plants, and I did the formatting for it. It has Alutiiq language, talks about our values, how to work with elders. We borrowed this, there was an article by Robbie Littlefield from the Tlingit region that was in a different book that both Terry and I thought was phenomenal. So we cited it. It's called the Tlingit Moon and Tide Teacher Resource. Working with the Native educators of the Alutiiq region, we identified what were the main things from them. And then also here you can see that collecting plants, the plant lore of an Alaska island.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Ahna, can you see her screen?
No, it's gone gray.
Yeah, it's gone gray for some reason. I can't see this.
Oh, sorry. It's because it went out of the, it opened it as a PDF. Thanks for telling me. So can you see it now?
I can see the alutiiqlanguage.org screen.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay. Sorry, I'll try and remember not to let that happen. So anyways, I'm not going to show the whole resource, but you can see that it's got plant information, the Alutiiq name. There's later versions of some of this content that's been made, but this was the original book. And at the end of it, we didn't produce it as like a bound book, but there were copies made and stapled and given to teachers back when we made it in the early 2000s. They had different recipe cards, and this was the beginning of the picture dictionary work I was doing. I did the little drawing of the man and the organs, and a couple of people had written some other lesson plans. So just an example of the type of resource that's housed here. And if I go back, let's see what happens if I click on this kind of so this, you can see this one, somehow it didn't get entered correctly. So like the author name isn't really there. It has a number there. I think this, if let's click on, I'm pretty sure this is information about the Alutiiq Museum's traveling boxes, but you see it's a broken link. So there are some things that got added. I mean, this was back in 2013 that aren't viable anymore and should be cleaned up. There is the Awani. Let's see if I click on that. Oh, fun. So Awani magazine, how to work with it, how to use it. So some of it you can see it's like not even published material. It's just scans of old material that maybe would have been lost, stuff that was written in the 90s about interviewing elders and the production of the Elwani magazine. So it's just a good place to look for stories and lesson plans. Lots of the Awanis got added in here. Let's see what this color activity is. Specific, this looks like, I mean, it's teaching colors in Alutiiq. So it's a lesson plan document that looks like Piggy pulled together.
And in short, the Elwani magazines, because I've seen a couple of them, that was a grant funded short-term thing, right? Or no?
No. Later years, yeah, but the original Elwani was this. It was a magazine that the high school produced. Dave Kubiak was a teacher when I was in high school, and this was before, trying to think, this one, what year does it say? This one, yeah, long before. So this one was done in 1979. And back then you could see Elwani was spelled differently. And these are stories that all the high school students, it was kind of like their version of a journalism class, but they interviewed elders on the island. Some of them were Alutiiq, not all of them, but you could see by the names, most of these people were Alutiiq. So they're all English interviews that the kids did, and then they wrote up they pretty much wrote them as transcripts. Some of them have like recipes in it, as you can see, or how-tos. It gives credit, you know, so Dave Kubiak is listed, and then you can see the names of the high school students. I mean, there's people that are, you know, in their 50s and 60s now that were students of his back in the day at Kodiak High School. And, you know, they're high school student projects. So this is the first time they've ever published anything. So there's things that are, you know, misspelled or grammatically not correct. You know, it could have gone deeper maybe in some assignments, but regardless, it's a phenomenal resource. I mean, look, it's like the measurements of how to build a kayak. And so this student, I don't know if it was Scott Clark who did it or if that was just the illustrator. But they took time to research a project, research with an elder in town, and then write it up with photos and drawings. So I'm going to the end to show the recipes. I think there was maybe over a decade of these books. So it wasn't just a handful, it was like a box full of books that were produced. And so if you searched for Elwani, most of them we've written here in the, you know, modern Alutiiq. You could see on the cover of the book, it was an older appearance. I'm just seeing if this is an old one too. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah. So this was a later version. After Dave Kubiak did it for like a decade, then the project ended and we all thought it should happen again. And so this was when, like you mentioned, it was just a few years. I think it was like maybe 5 or 6 years that the school district, the high school, coordinated it. So there were two, Sally Wilkers and Eric Waltenbaugh were among them at the early portion of it. And then Tanya Heitman took it on for another couple years. So they worked with, in this time, it was all of the villages. And then Tanya, in the last few years that they did it, had it at the Kodiak High School. I think she maybe had some rural student participation, but they were all focused on a specific theme, but they were interviews. So it's a invaluable resource that we didn't want to have just lost. There is copies, a full collection of it, I think, at the Kodiak Library and at the Kodiak College Library. But I don't know if anybody else has them. I have about 6 or 7 of the old ones myself because they had my grandma in it or something, you know. So those are the kinds of things you can find here. Well, let's see, Pledge of Allegiance. This is interesting. So Vicki Woodward, another teacher. So it looks like this was an actual project that Vicki did in Alutiiq when she took Alutiiq too, and she did the Pledge of Allegiance in, and then there were corrections. So you find that there is Alutiiq material embedded in here that isn't maybe on the alutiiqlanguage.org website. So it's worth like doing a keyword search or just identifying by looking and getting used to what's in here. I mean, there's only 200, but this was a worksheet I made for the high school using the picture dictionary image I'd drawn, and that we, you know, I didn't want it to just disappear, so we loaded it here. You'll see some overlaps, like some of these posters and flashcards are also on alutiiqlanguage.org. Assuming that my board games made it over there, you know, the get to know you game, the Agisaq. So that's the gist of the catalog. And those people who have administrative access, this is where they can most often be loading things, you know. A box will open up and it'll ask you all of these questions so that it's like check boxes for the subject, the values and such. And then I also put in a bibliography or references. Just mostly it was my dissertation. I pulled my entire reference page from the dissertation work that I did. My dissertation is on Alutiiq literature in the context of education and core values. And so it seemed relevant. I mean, the whole point of our stories is to teach our people. So that's the framework. And then I also included resource links, some of the major players of other information that is useful to Alutiiq education. Then if just looking at the content, sort of going back to the home page, I provided a summary of, you know, core values and encourage people to click on the resource tab because that's, like, as I said, the core of this website. But if you hold your cursor on home, it will drop down into the subcategories of our values. And I did this, I pulled these as direct sections from the dissertation. So it summarizes the 5 spheres of our core values that I identified in my book. And then under each value is the, you know, page or so of text that I wrote in the dissertation about the core value. And there are links bouncing you back and forth. And then you can also see the excerpt, that it is an excerpt from the dissertation, and you can get access to the whole. So I wanted to make sure that people understood what our core values were and had a little description, thinking that this would be a site that teachers would use, or parents, you know, families or learners. And then under history, again, all from the dissertation, I wrote about the Alutiiq history, and I pulled those sections from my book. There's pre-colonization summary here, for example. So I combined all of the 3 prehistory eras from Alutiiq history. You know, the hunter-gatherer, hunters, early hunters period, the early fisherman period, and then the chiefs and slaves period. And then the Russian period has its own tab. Again, we had a lot more information about that I could summarize in my dissertation. And it's meant to be a primer. You know, there's books available that people have written that are more in depth about Alutiiq prehistory and colonization. But for an educator who maybe is new to Kodiak Island, you would want them to be able to just read a couple pages and have a basic understanding to be able to effectively work with this content. And then I included a section about our modern Alutiiq Renaissance, sort of breaking out of the American period and saying that 1971, this is a sixth era in essence. So I included that part from the book too. Under calendar, when I was teaching the high school class, I wanted to make sure that my students, because it ran year round, I wanted to make sure that we celebrated and were aware of significant major events in the year that were related to Alaska Native and Kodiak Alutiiq, specifically history and culture. And so that's how this was born. I put this together from that research, and I also included the Alutiiq Museum and the Native educators had different notes and resources about harvest cycles. And this later became, and then I have like modern historical events also listed here. That later became that chart that you see. It's like a circular calendar that's in the Kalunuk book. And I think they maybe have used it. They used it again in the latest Alutiiq Traditions book at the Alutiiq Museum that I had drawn. And this was sort of an earlier version of that isn't visual. And then because the book, my dissertation was about stories, I wanted to include the sort of conclusion section of the book where I was arguing that our Alutiiq stories, our Alutiiq literature should be widely used, and that the purpose of it was for, education, but well-being and wellness in general. So I copied and pasted sections of my dissertation grouped into these different categories, talking about story forms. We have the Uniqquat, our traditional legends. We have the hero legends, Kuliangwat, and then of course there's songs, Atutet, and dance moves, Lit, and then of course cultural objects like talking pebbles, incised pebbles, petroglyphs, dolls, and masks are stories as well. So I talk about those as forms. And then the contexts, I included this more about like the education environment, the context that stories were told in schools, but also in like traveling storytellers, the role of the kashat before the priests took over basically. And that name became used more for a priest, but originally in Alutiiq society, it was a storyteller and ceremonial MC. And so that person, talk about that context. And then I have a section, there's a chapter in my dissertation about ethnographers. So it's that, more modern context of story collection, who gathered these stories, and I describe, their motivations. My book had a little bit more information on this, but this is, I was going to put more information in and I never did. So you can see I had the intent of putting links to each of the pages, and it would have been just a page from the dissertation. And then I have contemporary storytellers, and I was hoping that we would use this to promote, because we have people that are phenomenal storytellers, and I think there were a couple of people that are my age or a little older, a little younger, who were working with the stories and doing them as, you know, not necessarily a play, but acting them out in a more engaging format than just reading it. So I wanted a place for people to promote Alutiiq storytellers. And I was arguing in my dissertation that we should have an apprentice network of these young storytellers learning how to tell stories in our language and in English. So there's a space there to talk about that, building that network. And then I had two stories that I used in the dissertation. There's at the end of the book, two separate chapters where I gave a sample of how you could take a traditional Alutiiq story and build curriculum out of it and teach the lessons of those stories. And so I describe how you use stories as within a curriculum. So that's the stories tab. It's more of a hoped for future. And then of course I wanted to acknowledge the sponsors because each of these organizations contributed to this website in some fashion. So I didn't want it to be owned by one entity. The school district is technically the holder. They pay the annual fee of like $250 or something to Bluehost to keep this active. And hopefully add future resources. I have not seen a whole lot added. Mostly it's like the Alutiiq 1 and 2 student projects I think have gotten added here. But that's the intent. And tests, I think that the web developer was testing something and it just never got changed. So it's a work in progress, but the main point of it is this catalog. The person had read my dissertation, then you pretty much don't need to look at anything else because it's already from that, and use this as a way of finding resources that aren't anywhere else. I mean, I remember there was like a headdress. Let's see. Maybe I'll type in bead. There was some really cool really cool curriculum that I don't think exists anywhere else. Let's see if I can find something to show. So do you have any questions? I mean, I pretty much showed you every page and talked about how we built it. I think Terry just pulled all of these resources from that school district site, and then we gave them to the developer as one data dump with a spreadsheet that linked to, that gave all of this, and then he uploaded it for us. And then in the latter years, we added more. So like this was a research project that Shauna Hagna did. It was her, it was not trying to remember if this is a version of her master's thesis or not, but it was the report that she wrote about interviews with elders from around Kodiak Island at the time that she wrote it, which was 2004, 2003, 2004. And it was before we did the Master Apprentice project. So this was that 1-year planning grant. She interviewed people, hundreds of people. Like it was a survey of hundreds of people around the island and interviews with the specific speakers. Like, here, over 800 participants she had in this study. And she talked with every tribe and every Native corporation. And she wrote about the history of the Alutiiq people. And this was intended to be like fodder for the next grant. And then what was the point? Did we really want to save the language? How did people want to work with it? So if you haven't read this, it's really got some interesting data. I'm trying to remember if there's a nice chart or something at the end here. So that's how we did. I mean, that's how we figured out as a region what people wanted to do for saving our language. And how many people were there as speakers? So at the time, she had, it looks like 40, 50, 60 people that had basic speaking ability that participated in this. And then after this, we had other gatherings of people from around the island. I think we maybe had 3 to 5 of those strategic planning meetings where we talked about what we wanted to do with the language. Because, you can't, like, we created the Alisha Regional Kikadagamute Committee as a result of this. And she identified all these strategies. She talked about what the specific villages, every village, what they wanted. Anyways, I'm not gonna keep scrolling. You get the idea. She has that. I don't know, imagine that's probably also on the Alisha Museum website. Sorts of slideshows. These were things, I made this for the high school class where we talked about every core value, and I'd written it in the language and then had the original longer version that the elders had come up with. Some of the things that are in here don't have any Alutiiq language in them, and they weren't necessarily appropriate to add to alutiiqlanguage.org, but we didn't want to lose them. So the printed version, they have these thematic units. I mentioned this in the orthography class. This is the booklet that Native educators of the Alutiiq region and Native Village of Afognak, we partnered on this project. I did all the formatting for it, but we had a team of teachers writing this. We made 6 units, all by grade level, that focused on different grade appropriate topics that would teach about Alutiiq culture. And so there's not a lot of language education in this particular book, but you could use this in partnership with language lessons very easily. So we built this one as a more in-depth teacher lesson unit document. And then the teacher resource workbook was that in Alutiiq version. I had 20 lessons, I think. Oh no, 40 lessons total. So we had like a level 1 and a level 2 series. This is one of our earlier efforts to make Alutiiq language lesson plans. A lot of fun stuff in here though. Oh, I'm curious what the word wing. Oh, okay. So they loaded, like, just so that people would even know that word Quyanaa existed. It's just a web link. It's not a specific PDF, but it gives a little background on who Will Monroe is and why he made it and where to go to look at. So Kanyuk, we pulled the cord on me and I spun around and danced and told you about all this.
It's amazing. Quyanaa.
Mhm.
That is exactly what I was hoping for. Wait, Pinart papers.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
let's see what
thank you so
this
much.
is. Yeah, so this was Sven Hawkinson commissioned a French translator to take the portions of the Pinart. So Pinart's notes are like 700 pages long, handwritten in, and you can go view them in California at the archives there. But they took the portions, and they're in all these different languages. Most of it, some French, some English, some Russian, some all the different native languages that he came upon. So Celine Wallace did a translation, and that's what this is. There are stories embedded in here. There's some terms she didn't know how to write them, so there's some parentheses or italicized words that don't necessarily use the modern orthography, so they're a little tricky to figure out exactly what they say. And then unfortunately, there were portions that were in English that she could have, like we could have put it all together, but that's just the sections that were in French. So you kind of almost have to know, you have to have the whole document in order to like figure out which pieces it was. But there's a lot of neat stuff there.
Wait, can you click on the 2 voyages one?
2 Voyages is the book, let's see,
197.
190, oh yes. So Davidoff's book, it looks like, oh, it's Broken Link. I think somebody scanned the whole book in maybe
Okay.
and tried to load it. So,
Oh, it says PDF.
it was not appropriate.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it looks like,
But it's good to know that that book exists.
yeah, I don't know if they took it off because it was a copyright. I mean, I don't think that's a copyright issue because they're so old, but maybe these more recent, like the Voyage to America would be. Yeah, so you could see it sort of can function as a bibliography. You know, these books are like a bibliography.
Mm-hmm.
And they also, whoever put those in, also identified which values maybe were represented. I had, look, it's interesting. So I put this, I don't know if I did this or Candace put it in. We did about a year or so articles in the Kodiak Daily Mirror. We created like a logo for the Alutiiq language speakers and learners. We called it Quyanaa, but our voices. And this was the first article that we wrote. It was about Mother Languages Day and why we, the creation of this particular column. I did, some of those are also loaded on my website, aliciadrabek.com. But it's interesting that only that one seems to have made it in here. I feel like more care could be done using this as a database. You could argue that some of these, the whole database could be shifted into the Alutiiq Museum, but it's a sea of data there as well. So it's kind of nice that there's this one place that a teacher could go and try and find curriculum resources. And you can see a lot of them are just worksheets and handouts, not necessarily a curriculum lesson. But like the original introduction form that April made, you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with that document. It lives here too. I did all sorts of puzzles for the high school class. So word puzzles. So there's the original, and then I think the next one was the actual answer sheet. Yeah. I was way big into crosswords and word searches for all the vocabulary stuff. It was fun to do.
Yeah.
So I would say that, as you can see, as you go back in time, anything that was loaded before kind of this flood of like Elwani stuff, most of this were things that the district had, I think. Looks like this is a book. I don't know if you can get it through the Alaska Native Knowledge Network still. Looks like there's still a link, but the actual book you can download, the Alaska Science Camp Fairs and Experiments book by Alan Dick. That's a really neat resource. So it's not Alutiiq specific, but it's very applicable to, our region often. Not all of them. Some of them are snare types that we don't do, but those are written by an actual teacher, and it was a whole resource book. Weather information gap tasks. I'm just curious what this is. Oh, interesting. I think this maybe was something, I don't know if, you have to ask Peggy what this was, like the origin of it. Interesting things that got loaded over the years. Allendix Village Math is also a really neat resource. Jewelry, Alushic style. Oh, yeah, an actual video. Oops. Sorry, I can't. Have you seen those videos that they produced? There's some great YouTube videos that the Alushic Museum put out through the Frontier Scientists. There's several.
I haven't
So-
seen that. That one looks pretty interesting.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Alaska Tsunami Education Program, they put out a bunch of really neat, it's a book that they just developed, and we wanted to capture. So there was one specific one about the book I wrote, the Red Cedar Vafagnac Driftwood Journey. And so they have, grade level expectations or standards, objectives, materials. This is more like what you would expect to see in a lesson plan for a teacher to use. I would have thought that the symbolisms and patterns in Alutiiq art. Okay, you've seen, I think, and this got I know this is republished in the newer, the Ichach Jalip, is that how we said it? Our design book. So some of this stuff you'll be like, oh, I know that. It's in such and such a book. Well, it was loaded here 20 years ago. And then, or not 20, 10 years ago. And then later got put into another publication. Did I miss a chat? Oh, she is.
Yeah.
Okay, she stepped away. So, well, I'm glad to share it with you ladies. I hope you have fun looking through it.
There's
And
so much.
yeah, there is a lot of stuff. And I like that it's a search engine that's got these nice categories. That's another thing I really like about it. Because the Alutiiq Museum, you can search for things, but it isn't categorized per se
Mhm.
in the same way. Like you don't know what grade level it might be appropriate for, or what value it speaks to.
Yeah.
Oh, why? I think we've exhausted exploration of this website, short of looking at every individual thing. I see stuff. I see stuff that's here that I was like, oh, I forgot we loaded that, and I see others like, where's that? Why isn't that there? So, it could be made stronger.
Yeah. Quyanaa, Agisaq, Alisha, for doing this. I can stop the recording if that's okay.
Yeah.